Once again, it's that time for a brand new set release, and Journey Together is on the horizon. Our pre-release event started this last weekend, so it's time for us to look at the top 10 cards from Journey Together. Up first, we always start out with the art highlights, and today is no exception. This set does have a fair decent amount of really good art, although I do feel like it's a little bit less than usual. All the same, let's hit up some of these really cool arts. Starting out with some of the illustration rares, Iono's Kilowattrel and Lily's Ribombee, both really pretty cards. Frankly, I'm attached to Kilowattrel. I love Kilowattrel from the Paldea games, so this is just extra special for me. And then I first came back to the trading card game during Sun and Moon, so Lily as a character is really important to me because she was a really big part of me returning to the games, right? I jumped into Ultra Moon, obviously was guided around with Lily. Lily was a huge part of the game back when her supporter card was one of the best draws in the game. And like, I don't know, this is a great combination of characters for me. And then her Clefairy EX alt is just, it's so adorable. It's perfect. I really hope I pull this card when I open my packs, but this set is insanely difficult to find at a reasonable price. So we shall see if that happens. And then, because it would be a mistake not to mention some of the regular art from the set that is also really awesome, I'm going to hit up some of these cards too. We have art by Kodama for Torkoal. This Metapod is just, I don't know, there's something special about it. It's very simple, but I love the way the shapes and lines and stuff line up. The color is just like very simple, but it's also really striking. And then speaking of color, we have this Kecleon, which also has just some incredible color and it's just really vivid, beautiful art. Up next, we have the honorable mentions. These are cards that did not make the top 10. Perhaps given a different meta, they would have made the top 10, or given the right combination of cards, maybe they'll find their way up to the top by the end of the set. But right away, they aren't quite there, at least from the results we've seen from Japan. Up first is Lilligant. Lilligant has the ability Sunny Day. It says your grass and fire Pokemon's attacks do 20 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon before applying weakness and resistance. That's really the reason you'd be running this Lilligant, giving a little boost to the damage that Lilligant and other grass and fire Pokemon do. Unfortunately, this card hasn't seen a ton of play in Japan, and unlike Lurantis before, I don't know that it will here. But this is a card to keep in mind in the future if Pokemon Company, or creatures particularly, lets grass Pokemon be good again. And then up next we have Blaziken. Blaziken EX has the ability Seething Spirit. Once during your turn, you may attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon. And then we have the attack Smolder Salt, which does 200 damage. During your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. You are primarily using this for its ability, the ability to attach that basic energy card from your discard pile to any of your Pokemon in play is super, super powerful. And it allows you to do some slightly more flexible things than you would otherwise do, and give some energy acceleration to types that otherwise would be left without it. Then we have Iono's Kilowattrel. Unfortunately, she did not make the top 10, but Flashing Draw is a super good ability and is pretty interestingly a great way to protect yourself from Iono. It says you must discard a basic lightning energy from this Pokemon in order to use this ability. Once during your turn, you may draw cards until you have 6 cards in your hand. Again, really powerful ability, very similar to Bibarel before, but you have to have preloaded a lightning energy or otherwise have one in hand in order to make use of this ability. Super good. Unfortunately, not quite good enough to make the top 10. And similarly, we have Iono's Bellybolt. Iono's Bellybolt has Electric Streamer. As often as you like during your turn, you may attach a basic lightning energy card from your hand to one of your Iono's Pokemon. Really, really good ability. We've seen this as a stage 2 ability for forever. Things like Rain Dance. Just isn't making the splash that we'd expect in Japan. Kind of surprising, actually. And then its attack is Thunderous Bolt, which does 230 damage for 4 energy. That's 3 lightning and a colorless. It does 230 damage. During your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. And then another honorable mention, we have a few this time around, is Volcanion EX here with the ability Scalding Steam. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you may make your opponent's active Pokemon burned. And then for double fire colorless, Scorching Cyclone does 160 damage. Move an energy from this Pokemon to one of your benched Pokemon. Scalding Steam is pretty good. There is a deck, you'll see it on my channel, I believe next Wednesday, not this coming Wednesday, but the Wednesday after, we're going to get to see Volcanion work into combination with Magmortar and Badu to make quite the menace of itself. Unfortunately, that deck is a little bit more memey than maybe it should be. It does work against certain decks if they can't set up fast enough or if they can't handle item lock, but it's one of those decks that's a little bit more niche than maybe it should be. The effect is really, really cool, and Scalding Steam is definitely good. I can definitely see it being worthwhile as like a damage modifier in very specific situations, but out of the gate, Volcanion is not it. Iris's Fighting Spirit is another card that's really decent on paper. You just discard a card from your hand and then draw until you have 6 cards in hand. Again, pretty decent. It's like a slightly better Karina's Focus, Karina's Focus. But ultimately it isn't seeing a ton of play. And I think it's because hand sizes just tend to be so big right now. If hand sizes were a bit smaller, I think this would be a bit better. Frankly, I like this card a lot, and I think in a future format, this could be a really, really good draw supporter. But currently, it's just kind of one of those cards that is really deck dependent, and a lot of decks would just prefer something like Research. And then we have a couple more here. We have Lily's Pearl. Lily's Pearl says, if the Lily's Pokemon this card's attached to is knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, that player takes 1 fewer prize card. This is a really good effect, and it's something that could be quite a menace, but really the only Pokemon that Lily has that is worth throwing this on is Lily's Clefairy EX, and a lot of the decks that would run this are choosing just not to for deck space reasons, or just because they think they can recur Lily faster and easier than they can recur Lily's Pearl. It's a good card, and it's very similar to Life Dew, if you're familiar with Life Dew from way back in the day, the old Ace spec. That could attach to anything, and then it just doesn't give up a prize when it's not, or it gives up 1 less prize card when it's knocked out. Unfortunately, Lily's Pearl just doesn't have enough good targets for the card itself to be as useful as we'd hoped. If there were more Lily's Pokemon, if it were more flexible, then it would definitely see a ton of play, but as it is, it's a bit too niche. Levincia, very similar to Mount Coronet before it, also a very good card. Same effect for a different energy type. This is kind of taking a hit from Ino stuff not being as played as it should be, or as it could be perhaps. This card will definitely see some play in the future though. I think this is like, think of like Training Court from Sword and Shield. This card will definitely see play in the future. It's just a matter of when and in what deck, because being able to just grab 2 basic energy cards from the discard pile and put them back into your hand, pretty good. I could definitely see something like Raging Bolt abusing this if they so choose. And now for the top 10. These are the top 10 cards that have seen play or are decent or just have great potential in Journey Together. And these are cards you should definitely be looking out for. I think you should probably grab most of the cards on this list, both in the honorable mentions and in the top 10. But these top 10 cards are definitely ones you should have on hand. If you are a believer in Hop's Bag is the first card on the list that you should have. It says search your deck for up to 2 basic Hops Pokemon and put them onto your bench. Then shuffle your deck. This is a super buddy Poffin just for Hops stuff. There's no way this would ever be bad in a Hops deck, so it's just 100% worth it if you're planning to play Hop. Hop will be good-ish, but maybe not as bust as people were hoping out of the gate. All the same, Hop's Bag is great. You've seen how good Buddy Poffin is. Just think of it for Hop. Additionally, Hop's Cramorant has echoes of Buzzwole before it. It has that Fickle Spit attack, which does 120 damage, not 60 as it says on the screen. It does 120 damage, and if your opponent doesn't have exactly 3 or 4 prize cards remaining, the attack does nothing. So basically, if your opponent has either 3 or 4 prize cards, it does 120 damage, which for a single energy, or as we'll see with the tool that we're about to look at, no energy, and 150 damage, this card is super, super powerful. And if you happen to play in any of the pre-releases for Journey Together, you know that in a pre-release, it was extremely oppressive because it just did so much damage so fast for so little energy. Again, this is one of those cards that even outside of a Hops deck might be worth playing, depending on the situation, just because it's so decent as a single prize attacker. And then that card I just alluded to is Hop's Choice Band. Hop's Choice Band says attacks used by the Hops Pokemon. This card is attached to cost one colorless less and do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon before applying weakness and resistance. Which means not only are you doing 30 extra damage, you have one less colorless to pay in order for the attack cost. So going back to the previous Pokemon with Cramorant, you're not paying anything for that attack cost to do that 150. Super, super powerful. And Hop Zacian EX also is able to use its Instant Strike attack. Instant Strike, of course, here does the 30 damage. So you'd be doing 60 with the belt, for the band rather, for free. And then the attack also does 30 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. And of course, you're not applying a weakness or resistance for benched Pokemon. And then Hop's Zacian EX also has Brave Slash, which does 240 damage. And of course, because they love this text, you can't use Brave Slash next turn. Hop's Zacian is, of course, number 7 on the top 10 here. But it's also part of the Hops deck, so it's kind of in that same cluster with the rest of the Hops cards. And then at number 6, we have In's Darmanitan. In's Darmanitan has Backdraft for 2 colorless energy. It does 30 damage, 30 times damage, that is. This attack does 30 damage for each basic energy card in your opponent's discard pile. This becomes a big nuke against decks like Ceruledge that just try to throw all their energy in the discard pile to do big things. And then additionally, you have Flame Body Cannon for Fire colorless. It does 90 damage to the active Pokemon, and then it has you discard the energy from the Pokemon, all the energy that is, and it does 90 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So it's a slightly more expensive version of Radiant Greninja's attack, but it only hits the active and 1 bench instead of 2 Pokemon of your choosing. The effect is still quite potent. Then at number 5, we have In's PP Up, or as we also call it, the Caster's Bane, because of all the juvenile jokes that will be made around this card's name. But it is In's PP Up, and it says attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to one of your benched In's Pokemon. Think of this as like a Metal Saucer or a Dark Patch, but instead of being tied to a type, it's tied to a specific trainer's Pokemon. You know it's going to be good, and it'll definitely see play in the In's archetype. Just if you're planning to play In's, grab them. You're going to need them. Speaking of In's, at number 4, we have In's Zoroark EX. It has the ability Trade. You must discard a card from your hand in order to use this ability. Once during a turn, you may draw 2 cards. We've seen Trade numerous times over the last few years. It's also been called Refinement, but it's the same effect. Discard, draw 2, a very potent effect. And we do also have Night Joker, which is an attack here. For 2 darkness energy, choose one of your bench In's Pokemon's attacks and use it as this attack. So we already saw a couple of In's Pokemon here. Well, specifically, we've seen the Darmanitan, but there are other In's Pokemon that Inzor can also copy, including In's Reshiram, which did not make this list or the honorable mentions, but it can do big damage if you've not been one-shot or spread some damage with In's Darmanitan's attacks. All in all, a very flexible Pokemon with a great draw. At number 3, we have Hops Double. It's interesting, this card kind of finds itself away from the rest of the Hops archetype, and often doesn't even show up in Hop's archetype. But when you have a gusting effect on an ability, rest assured it will see some play pretty much no matter what. Hops Double has the ability Defiant Horn. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, you may switch in your opponent's benched Pokemon to the active spot. So you have basically a boss's orders when Hops Double evolves from Hops Wooloo. Extremely powerful effect on a single price Pokemon. I cannot stress how insanely good this Pokemon is. If the deck can fit it, it should probably be running it. This card is absolutely broken. And I say broken in the Pokemon creator way, not in the literal way. It's a very strong effect, and Boss's Orders is always quite good, and this effect is no exception. At number 2 is Brock's Scouting. I think a lot of you probably are scratching your head. Why is this card there? It doesn't make sense. It does, trust me. There is still a decent amount of item lock with everybody's favorite Rosebud, Badoo. And this is a way to get around it. It is a very flexible card. Honestly, more flexible than usual for this type of card. You're able to search your deck for up to 2 basic Pokemon or for an evolution Pokemon. You reveal them, then you put them into your hand. This allows you to just get what you need, even if you're under item lock, and allows you to continue setting up. And that's not something you're always able to do. Do we have something like Luminion or Tapu Lele or Lapras that would let us get this? Not in standard format, at least not currently. Not without an evolution, of course. That's Pelipper's job. But all the same, I think this card is still good. And I think some decks should consider at least a one of, just to have it around as an option for when they get item locked. And then at number one, I think this is a clear and this number one, frankly, is no contest for Journey Together. There is no doubt that number one is Lily's Clefairy EX. Lily's Clefairy EX is by far the best card out of this set. It fits in more decks than any of these other cards. It does much more work than any of these cards. It makes Dragapult hurt any more than any of these cards, and both Dragapult and Raging Bolt, despite this card, are still doing reasonably well in Japan. Without this, I feel like they would probably be running the entire format over. But Fairy Zone says the weakness of your opponent's dragon Pokemon is now Psychic. Apply a weakness as ×2. This forces dragon Pokemon to now have a weakness, which they are not used to having, because since Sword and Shield, they have had no weakness, and this gives it back to them. And then Lily's Clefairy has a good attack too. It says Full Moon Rondo, does 20 plus damage. This attack does 20 more damage for each benched Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's. So if you're familiar with Suicune, or Palkia, or Entei, or Raikou, it's the same idea here. We have that 20 plus damage for each of the benched Pokemon on each side, and you're just hitting big damage, especially if you're smashing into a Dragapult EX that really deserves a Full Moon Rondo to the face. Anyway, that is going to be it from me today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this little top 10. I'm curious, what is your guys' top 10? What does it look like? Would you have a different list? Do you have a few cards that you think I left off, or out of even the honorable mentions that need to be thrown in? Do you agree with my number one? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, stay happy, stay healthy, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.